Simple steps to implement to lose fat today. Body fat is an endocrine organ, which means that it secretes hormones that regulate body function, metabolism as well. Body fat cells can actually expand 1,000 times their own size. When we gain weight, we think that we get more fat on our bodies, but really, the cells that we have are just expanding. The number one type of fat that is associated with obesity and diabetes is something called visceral fat. This is a type of fat that surrounds organs is actually quite dangerous. We don't want fat around our organs. We really want them subcutaneously, which we'll get to. But when we lose fat, interestingly, 70% of it is actually lost through the breath. Not through sweat, but by actual breathing. And a lot of this happens while we sleep. So what are some simple strategies we can do today? Number one is to reverse insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is your body producing too much insulin and high blood glucose levels over time. What happens basically is we flood our bodies with large amounts of glucose, and insulin's job is to get that glucose into the cell. But now, it only can do so much. We only can fit so much into the cells. If we keep flooding our body with glucose, what happens is these cells become resistant to insulin. So insulin is not really able to do its job to get the glucose into the cells. So we have all this glucose floating around the bloodstream, just tearing things up, causing all the symptoms that you see associated with diabetes. And again, this causes a host of issues such as weight gain and diabetes, and there's so many strategies that we can actually do to reverse this naturally, and let's get into that. Shift your carbohydrate intake to a smaller percentage. Carbohydrates spike insulin more than any other macronutrient. Protein spikes a little bit, but fat does not spike insulin. So keep that in mind. It's not about eating a low carbohydrate diet necessarily, it's more about shifting the ratios to a higher fat, lower carb percentage. Some foods spike your glucose more than others, but it really depends on you and your own unique metabolism. There's something called the glycemic index, a scale of 1 to 100 basically indicating how much a food spikes it, 100 being the highest. And again, this is a generalization of things because we all respond differently to things. And there's another thing called the glycemic load, which is basically how many carbohydrates are in that particular food. And processed carbohydrates are always going to tend to have a deranged metabolism and spike your glucose even more than, say, sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are excellent. They're very low on the glycemic index. And those are just some examples. Build muscle. Muscle is a glucose sink, which means that glucose is primarily stored in your muscle as glycogen or stored glucose. So the more muscle that we have, the more sugar or blood glucose we can tolerate. So having more muscle on your frame is very important. Intermittent fasting. Fasting is a great way to lower insulin and regulate hormonal levels. A study done in the Journal of Cell Metabolism showed that the participants who undergone intermittent fasting showed to be more insulin sensitive, had more regulated weight, and cardiometabolic health. So let's get into the second strategy here, which is strength training. This is critical for building muscle and burning fat. The more muscle you have, the better able you'll be to tolerate glucose. Also, muscle is expensive to carry around, which means that you're going to be burning more calories just by having more muscle on your frame, by doing nothing. Focusing on the big muscle groups, such as glutes, chest, shoulders, will serve you when it comes to fat loss. So doing things like squats, deadlifts, bench press, basically the multi-compound movements, rather than isolated movements. When it comes to building muscle, a lot of it comes down to the foundational movements that we've been doing for a long time. There's a lot of fancy shit, but we don't really need to focus on that as much. As always comes down to mastering the basics. Number 3 is to activate brown fat. Now, brown fat is a type of fat that actually burns fat. And it's brown because it's so dense in mitochondria. It's located by the neck, upper back, and the clavicles. The main function of brown fat is to generate heat. Because of this, it improves metabolic rate and supports fat loss. Now, babies have a ton of brown fat because they're not able to shiver. So, as we get older, we kind of lose brown fat. We don't have much of it. But there are strategies you can actually do to improve our brown fat composition. Number 1 for that is going to be to do cold therapy, which has been shown to be the number 1 way to actually improve fat composition for the brown adipose tissue. The way that it does this is through mitochondrial protein uncoupling, resulting in improved metabolic rate and increased insulin sensitivity. Some strategies to implement that are a cold shower, which pretty much has access to everyone. This is the practice of turning the shower to cold for 2 to 5 minutes. And you can start slow with this, like you don't have to do as cold as you can, like you have time and temperature to work with. Just like exercise, you can increase your tolerance over time. So do what you can right now, just get started and work as you go. Again, this is a great way to improve our brown fat composition, as well as a great stoic practice, like to just be more resilient in life, feel accomplished, and how you can handle things. You can also do a cold plunge, which is being fully immersed in cold water, whether it's an ice bath, natural bodies of water, or a done for you cold plunge. So filling a tub full of ice, getting into a natural lake or stream that is cold. And there are great done for you things like the Morasco Forage, which is amazing. It filters the water with ozone and UVC light, so it's very clean, and has a lot of other benefits such as earthing because it's kind of conductive in there. And there's no EMFs coming out of there as well. So it's just kind of like combining practice, synergistic effects. So if you're having trouble losing weight, there are always more strategies that we can do. Like, don't just get stuck on one thing. There's more auxiliary things, admittedly, but even if you're not, these are just great health practices overall to implement in your own life.